everybody. So today we are going to be talking about astrology and mental health and how astrology can be used to help with one's mental health, on their mental health journey, mental health healing, all of these sorts of things. Now, before I start this video, I do want to throw out a disclaimer that I am in no way, shape, or form saying that astrology should be the only vehicle that one uses for exploring their own mental health, for getting and feeling mentally healthy. I am not at all advocating that anybody get rid of the mental health care that they already have in place or anything of that nature. I want to make that really clear off the bat. But I do think that astrology can be a wonderful tool to use on your own mental health journey and helping other people on theirs. If you read for clients, right, or read for friends, or read for family, or read for whoever, it can definitely be a useful tool to use to help people explore their mental health more, to dive into their mental health more, to kind of see what's going on, and from this kind of lens, from this lens of mental health. I think astrology can be a wonderful thing to work with in tandem. And you know, some people might choose not to go like the traditional mental health route. They might want to just use things like astrology or tarot or other sorts of healing modalities, what have you. That's totally fine too. I just want to make it very clear off the bat, I'm not advocating for anybody that has actual like traditional mental health care in place, whether that be psychologists, psychiatrists, what have you. I'm in no way, shape, or form saying that you should drop all of those and just, you know, look at this from an astrological lens. I want to make that really clear. But I do think that it can be used in tandem while you're on your mental health journey. And this is an area of interest for me personally for a couple of reasons. First, I got my bachelor's in psychology. So psychology has always been interesting to me. Always, always, always. I take a very psychological approach a lot of the time when I read for people. Not always, it depends on what the client wants. But oftentimes I do feel like it is for me anyway, you might feel different, but I do think that for me it's a good way to go, and my clients seem to like it. So that is kind of the approach that I take a lot of the time, unless something else is needed, like an electional chart or a horary chart, or something there isn't as much of a need to take a psychological approach. But definitely to natal chart readings, that is kind of naturally the way that I go. And mental health is also interesting to me because I'm somebody who, from, like a preteen onward, have kind of functioned at a low-grade depression, functioned with what I call low-grade depression. It's always there. It never really goes away. It just is. And it probably will always be there. And I don't really, really let it interfere too much with anything, but it's actually been through astrology and traditional mental health care in tandem that I have kind of been able to work through a lot of that, if you will. So, so there are a few reasons why this is interesting to me personally. And I know that it's interesting to you all too, to some of y'all, maybe not all of y'all. Some of y'all might be like, I don't give a shit about this. But, to some of y'all, I know that it is. Like, on the subreddit, on the Let's Fuck with Astrology subreddit, this is a question that gets asked. People will post their chart and then they'll ask questions like, why am I anxious? Why am I depressed? I see this in other subreddits too, in other astrology subreddits, people asking, why am I anxious? Why am I depressed? How can this be seen through my chart? And I also see it on other forums that I creep on, because I creep everywhere. But this is a common question. It's a very valid question. So, and just to be clear, I am going to be focusing on depression and anxiety here. I'm not really going to deviate out into anything else. I might in time. This might be something that I do more videos on in time, but for right now, these are going to be my two kind of primary things, because they do seem to be the things that people have issues with, you know, these are struggles for a lot of people. So I'm gonna mention these kind of, and the, can you see these in a chart? Can you see depression in a chart? Can you see anxiety in a chart? I want to be careful how I say this, because you can see, like, the natal chart is like a roadmap of, it's essentially like a map of possibilities. Does that mean all of these possibilities have to be activated and that there's only one way for these things to be activated? No. But there are certain things in a chart, like certain aspects that you might see in a chart, that could perhaps point towards somebody perhaps having struggles with anxiety, having struggles with depression. But that does not mean that they have to manifest that way. I want to make that really clear. Like, I don't know, for instance, like I'll see like, not taking, and remember, you got to take the whole fucking chart into account, right? You got to take it all into account. But like, I don't know, like a moon square Saturn, say. This could point towards somebody being more inclined towards being depressed. Doesn't mean it has to manifest that way, though, but it could. It could, especially if other things are going on, but it doesn't have to manifest that way. Things like that, you know. So, you know, but yeah, like the moon square Saturn is one thing that would stand out for, like, for something like depression, or as being possible. I could also see the moon squaring Mercury playing into, well, actually, let's back up. The planets specifically. We'll back up here. The planets specifically that I would look at for, like, mental health kind of stuff. And mind you, I don't look at, and while I do take a psychological approach to chart reading a lot of the time, I don't always, I'm very cautious to be like, this person is depressed. Like, you know what I mean? Because these aspects can, these planets and these signs and these houses and these aspects can manifest in a whole bunch of different ways. Now, if I'm if I'm looking at a chart and I'm really seeing that there are a lot of things going on that could point to that person having struggles with depression or having struggles with anxiety, I'll ask about it. I won't necessarily be like, I know you're this, because that's, no. And I don't think that's a good way to approach reading anyway. But, I mean, it kind of takes, if I'm sitting there going, I know you're this way, that takes the power out of the person's hands. You know what I mean? The client's hands. I don't like that. But if I do see a whole bunch of hits for something like depression, something like anxiety, I will ask about it. If either one of those or both of those or whatever have ever been a struggle for the person. But like the planets that I'll kind of, and for anybody that has any sort of mental health struggles, I would definitely look at these particular planets in your chart. I would look at Mercury. Obviously, Mercury is the mind, among all the other things that Mercury is. But I would definitely look at what Mercury is doing in your chart. The moon, for sure. See what the moon is doing in your chart. I would look at Saturn. Because while Saturn, don't get me wrong, I mean, I love Saturn. I named my business Saturn Season Astrology. I love Saturn. But Saturn can, I was going to say Saturn can have there can be like a depressive influence with Saturn. There can be, but you know what? I really take that back, because I think it's more realism. More realism. And I don't know about you all, but this world can be a fucking depressing ass place. It really can be. And Saturn is very realistic. And sometimes I feel like the things that are depressive about Saturn are actually just realistic. Same thing with the pessimism that Saturn can get labeled with. Sometimes I think that that is just really more realistic than it is depressing. You know, sometimes I have to check myself as somebody who's got Saturn rising. I have to check myself sometimes with that and think to myself, am I being realistic or am I being pessimistic? And, you know, whoever I'm talking to or whatever just doesn't want to hear it. Just doesn't want to hear the reality of things. Sometimes it's one or the other, you know, sometimes it's a little bit of both. But, yeah, so I think sometimes Saturn can just be like a slap in the face with reality. And that can be kind of depressing depending on what the reality is, right? But I definitely think for that reason, Saturn can play in with mental health, especially also because Saturn can have it can be kind of limiting. It can feel limiting at times. And if it's feeling limiting, and if it's, say, making a contact, making some more challenging contact with your, say, I don't know, your moon or your Mercury, that could cause some difficulty, right? I would also look at Pluto for things like specifically with, well, I could see Pluto playing with anxiety too, but I was going to say specifically with depression, though I could see how Pluto's very transformative, so I could see how Pluto could bring anxiety into the equation, especially if the transformation made them anxious in some way. But I could see how Pluto could play in with depression, especially if, like, I don't know, if Pluto in the chart couldn't express the intensity that it wanted to, the depth that it wanted to, or didn't know how to do that, I could see how that could be kind of depressing, or it could cause some issues in that area. Uranus, I feel like Uranus can play in specifically more with anxiety than with depression. I don't know, like Uranus squaring Mercury, say, I could see that, or even Uranus conjunct Mercury, Uranus opposing Mercury. I could see more challenging Uranus-Mercury contacts producing anxiety, or giving the person an inclination towards being more anxious. That's not universal. None of this is universal. None of it. None of it is. Just some ideas for you to think about in your own chart, from your own vantage point of your own mental health. Just some things to think about. Neptune can play in with mental health too, though I find Neptune mental health tends to be, I mean, I could see how it could play in with anxiety, especially if you didn't feel like you were completely in reality for some reason. I could see how Neptune could play into this, because that could make you feel anxious. It could also make you feel depressed. Though usually when I think of Neptune sorts of mental health stuff, it's not so much depression and anxiety. It's more illusionary. But I do think that Neptune can play into to mental health just in a different way. And to be fair, all of the planets can play into mental health. These are just kind of the ones that like come off the top of my head at first, especially because I do have clients sometimes that do come to me and they mention this as something that as an area of focus. Sometimes I might bring it up to them, and sometimes they bring it up. Chiron, not a planet, but I would definitely think Chiron can tie into mental health too, because it is our core wounding. So I feel like definitely Chiron. I'm saying weird shit. Chiron can tie in, for sure. Absolutely. Now, my advice to everybody here watching this would be if you have mental health struggles and you're wanting to dive more into this from an astrological lens, I would definitely get to know the planets in Chiron that I mentioned, and get to really know them in your chart by sign, house, and aspects made. Really get to know them and understand both the light and the shadow, because all planets have a light about them and have a shadow about them. And it's kind of being able to shake hands with the shadow parts, right, that I think help the light parts to come to light. The more that we ignore the shadow parts, the less we make friends with them. I think the more we can struggle as people. And this would also tie in with mental health struggles too. So I do think knowing the shadow and the light side of specifically these planets in this context of mental health is important. Is important to really be able to help yourself. Another thing that I feel like could help too, and I've mentioned this before in a couple of other videos, but it's been a while, about the midpoints. Like if you've got, like, I don't know, if you feel like you've got this going, let's say you've got this going on in your chart. Let's say you've got Saturn square the moon, and you do have some issues, some struggles with depression. And you know this about yourself, and you feel like this particular aspect in your chart might play into this, might have something to do with this. It's probably more than just this one aspect, but just kind of, suspend disbelief for just a second, and let's say it's just this one aspect that you're focused on. Okay, so what you would want to do is, I would look at, if it were me, I would be looking at the midpoint between Saturn and the moon, seeing where that falls in the chart, because I do feel like the midpoints, specifically for the squares, oppositions, the quincunx, the more challenging aspects, I do think that the squares can be a place in the chart by sign and house that can kind of show where that tension can be released between the square, or where that balance can be found with the opposition, or where those planets can be seen with the quincunx. I do think that finding the midpoints can be incredibly important. And if the midpoint happens to be conjunct a natal planet, that natal planet then becomes a vehicle to work that midpoint through. And I just want to mention this. Some asshole in some other video said I didn't know what I was doing with midpoints. I'm just doing it differently than other people do, and I don't give a shit. So if he's gonna leave, if you're watching this and you're gonna leave a nasty comment, I'm not responding. Anyway, I do think I have found that the midpoints are very, very useful when it comes to easing the stress with squares, to balancing with the oppositions, with both planets being able to be seen with the quincunx. Very, very useful. And this could be used strictly from a mental health lens. If you're really wanting to dive into your natal chart from the lens of mental health. Trying to think if there was anything else I wanted to talk about here today. I think that's pretty good. If you feel like sharing in the comments below, if you have any, you don't have to go into your struggles. I'm not asking you to go into your own personal struggles, but if you feel like in your own chart, if you feel like there are certain aspects, or maybe it's just a planet and a sign in a house, or whatever, if you have struggles with, anxiety, struggles with depression, and you feel like you have personally kind of nailed down some areas in your chart where that could possibly be seen, I'd love to read it. I would love to see it, because this kind of stuff is, it's just very interesting. I think it's very, very interesting. And again, none of this is universal, absolutely none of it. You do have to take the whole chart into account, but I would be curious to hear what you all have to say. And I will put where you can find me for any kind of reading below in the description box. and I will see all of y'all later.